Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
The first plane smashing into the World Trade Center. We've seen video throughout the day of the second plane that
The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror.
Of September 11th, I was actually up in Rochester, New York, and I was in the airport doing an interview.
On the morning of those attacks, what's interesting was I was on the hiring committee, the firm's hiring committee, and the firm I had been at had a lot of space in the World Trade Center. The firm we merged with was mostly a Chicago firm with a small New York office in Midtown. And we always had our hiring committee meetings in the World Trade Center where most of the people were. That morning we decided, well, just as a favor to the people that were in the Midtown office, we'll have our meeting in the Midtown office. And normally I would have been getting in just at the time that the plane hit.
I had gotten to work and I was just out chatting with some of my coworkers on 62 South Tower.
On September 11th, it was Lauren's first day of preschool. We dropped Lauren off and the parents gathered downstairs in the meeting room for coffee and meet and greet with the director, Kim.
Good morning, America. I'm Charles Gibson.
I'm Diane Sawyer, and it's Tuesday, September 11th, 2001.
It is lunchtime in London, 5 a.m. in Los Angeles, and 8 a.m. here in New York, live from the CNN Financial News headquarters.
It is beautiful outside, perfect September day with lots of sunshine. Oh, would you look at Washington, huh? I'm going outside today.
Other than that, it's kind of quiet around the country. We like quiet. It's quiet. It's too quiet.
Never forget that day. The weather was unbelievable. It was a clear sapphire sky, a beautiful Indian summer day, and no one would have ever thought such a tragic thing would happen on such a majestic weather day. And every year, as the end of August comes around and we have those crisp blue sapphire days, the memory comes back, and I think of it every year.
Any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
Oh my God.
That looks like a second plane. has
I
just
did not
hit.
see a plane go in. That just exploded.
We just saw another plane coming in from the side.
You did. That was out of
Yes,
on
and
my
that's
view.
the second explosion. You could see the plane come in just from the right-hand side of the screen. So this looks like it is some sort of a concerted effort to attack the World Trade Center that is underway.
People are running away very, very quickly. There are more explosions further down the building.
This is so shocking, of course, to everybody watching.
I've never seen anything like it.
Outside the media center, they had 3 big screen TVs, and we're watching what's going on over at the North Tower. And we were very concerned because there was a division of our company that had been sold a few years earlier, and they were located on the 94th floor of Tower 1. So we were in shock. Obviously it was bad enough we kind of knew what was, that the plane had hit, and obviously that's bad, but then it was like, oh, wow, people that we used to work with very closely, it hit pretty much right where they were, okay? So we were, just in shock, and sorry, at times I will get a little emotional. Just bear with me, it's okay. So it was probably 2 or 3 minutes after that announcement. It wasn't long. The second plane hits our building. I had actually turned around and was facing away from the TVs, but some people were still watching, and there was a gentleman who I don't know, and I never saw him again afterwards, but when the plane hit, there was, of course, a loud explosion. But it wasn't just that. It was, if you've ever been standing and somebody just gives you a shove, it was like that in that you actually had to step back in order to keep yourself from falling. It was pretty crowded, and everybody pushed that one way. So it wasn't just the sound, it was the movement and the feeling, right? The shaking. And then this guy, he was a big guy. He was a really big guy. He had been watching the TV, and he grabs me by the shoulders, and he's looking down at me. He said, "Did you see it? Did you see it? It was a plane. It was a plane." So I didn't see it. There was a coworker who actually did see the plane kind of come and saw the explosion. Immediately, we knew something was wrong, and we told everybody, just go to the lobby. And I went to my office to collect a couple things. It was pretty scary. There was debris coming down and hitting the side of the building, hanging up against the side of the building. So I got out of there really quick. There was a very loud explosion. Maybe in the first couple seconds, there was some thought that perhaps it was thunder, which would have been very unusual because it was like a perfectly crystal clear blue day. But then I think, pretty much almost immediately, everybody realized it's an explosion of some type, and within it was clear that a plane had hit the North Tower because some of the people on the floor, they were able to see it, actually. So they had come out and said, a plane.
None of us knew what kind of evacuation had taken place. And a lot of us felt like it was possible that our entire firm had just been killed, and we had no way of knowing. And then what happened was people from downtown, slowly were walking up to Midtown, to wherever, and people started showing up at the Midtown office who had been at the World Trade Center, and they walked up and they said that in fact there had been a pretty good evacuation, and that they thought that most people from the firm had gotten out. Mm-hmm. And so what we did was we started making a list. Actually, we had the list in the library, and anyone who had either gotten out of the World Trade Center, would sign if they were there, or if you saw somebody who had gotten out, you'd put their name on it, or if you heard from someone who was out, you put their name on it. So we tried to make a list so we could account for everybody. And by either the end of the day or the next day, that was a Tuesday, so by the next day, we had basically accounted for everyone except 3 people. Hot, fiery gasoline fell down some of the elevator shafts.
Oh.
So if you had been in the elevator at the time it hit, or if you were standing outside the elevator door when the elevator doors opened up, fire came out.
Oh.
So that would have been the only sort of, because I mean, one of my friends said his hair got sort of burned because he was standing by the elevator and
Right.
fire came out. So I mean, that would have been the risky thing. People were killed who were in the elevators. One of the guys in the office was actually looking out the window as the plane came. He saw it coming, and he said, like, as it comes, you know, as it's a bit of a distance, you can't judge how high it is. He says he thought it was coming directly at his window. Now, it hit 40 floors higher. He says, but when it's, 1,000 feet out, it looks like it's coming directly at you. It's one of my most vivid memories is when we were over there on the west side walking down. At one point, we saw a couple of fighter planes overhead. And it really was very comforting. The feeling that we had taken back our skies.
In our office right on the perimeter of the airport, and one of our secretaries ran in. I was in the middle of conducting an interview for a new employee that would live in that area, and ran in and said we needed to evacuate. So my first response was, is there something wrong with the building? Is there a fire? What's going on? And that's when they said, no, there's something going on with all airports. So I really didn't at first understand exactly what was happening. I actually thought that it was happening in Rochester and not down in New York City. We didn't have a TV in our office. We actually just had a radio, so we put that on. And as soon as I got outside of the airport area, immediately we were told. The emergency vehicles were actually all dispatched, and actually the emergency vehicles were in the building right next door to where I was conducting the interview. So they immediately went out to the tarmac, which is why we thought that it was specific to that airport. And then everybody else was just fleeing as fast as they could in their cars. I think at the airport, people were confused. I know that there were some people that were angry, like, what do you mean we're not flying today? I don't really understand how this affects us.
Like I said, it was Lauren's first day of preschool, and the weather was just amazing with the clear blue skies, the sapphire skies. It's something I'll never forget. And each autumn, I remember it when that weather is the same. It's just something that will stay with me forever. The way JFK's shooting has stayed with my mom's generation. She can tell you the details of where she was that day. I can remember this day. It'll be the event of our generation. And also a friend of mine lost her husband in the towers, and a way to help was we all made a collection, and I bought her a month's load of dinners from a butcher, and it was so helpful to her, and it helped her get on with her life with so many children at home. The moment is so memorable, and I remember wanting to hug Lauren as soon as she came out of school, and it was so frantic during that first day pickup. Everyone just grabbed their children and ran home to check on family members, and of course the cell phones and phone lines were all down in Manhattan. It was just chaos. And that following 2 nights later, my daughter had a soccer game, and one of the boys on her team lost his dad. And we all, the visiting team and our team, we formed a circle in the middle of the field, holding hands, and had a moment of silence. And The kids were only 8 years old, but I think they remember that, and they will remember that forever.
The trade tower again, because John, we now have what do we have? We don't.
It looks like a new plume, a new large plume of smoke.
Only one tower is standing. The other has collapsed.
Thanks very much,
completely collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
A portion of which is collapsing. Good Lord. There are no words.
Almost immediately from when the first plane hit, I was trying to call my wife. The cell phone capacity to handle all those calls just wasn't there, right? So, I mean, everybody was pretty much doing the same thing. The other guy, he got through to his wife. So all this time we're trying, like anybody who had a cell phone was trying to get through to whoever they were trying to get through to. You couldn't get through. He asked her to get a hold of my wife.
Well, you know, cell phones were pretty much useless. You know, a landline at the office, and I called home, but Julie was out. I wanted to try to reach the kids. Mm-hmm. And called Ridge. And I got through, and I got, like, the office or the desk or whatever it was. And this was pretty early. This was probably about before 10 o'clock. And I said to whoever answered, I said who I was, and that I had 2 kids in school. And I said, you know, in case you hadn't heard, there's been a terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. I work there, but I'm okay. I'm fine. Will you get a message to my kids? And the person said, well, we haven't made a general announcement yet about what's happened, but we'll take care of it. In fact, what they did was sometime thereafter, the principal, I guess, goes on the loudspeaker and announces there's been a terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. Will the following students please come to the office? And he lists the number of students, including Jennifer and Jonathan Sabella. So they immediately think I've been killed. And to this day, it makes me furious.
Cell phones did not work at all. You couldn't call anybody on your cell phones. The lines were so, it was the first time it ever happened, the lines were so full that you could not actually, all you got was a busy signal. So what I actually did was drove to the closest office that we had that was right off airport property, and from there I used a landline to make a phone call to my husband's office.
We left the Midtown office sometime probably around 1 o'clock. Mm-hmm. You know, and it was unclear how to get home. I was with another guy, and we walked over to the west side. And we wanted to see if we can get a ferry to New Jersey or something. I mean, there were loads and loads of people. And ultimately what we did was we started walking downtown on the west side, and they had basically taken like excursion boats and turned them into ferries. And they were leaving from the area around Chelsea Piers. Mm-hmm. So we got on this big boat, which was not a ferry, it was some sort of, you know, excursion boat, and they just packed everybody on there.
Down the New York Thruway, all of the rescue workers from hours outside the city were police officers, firefighters, ambulances, everybody from all upstate New York that as I was coming down the Thruway was all on the road trying to get. Our drive actually took between 13 and 14 hours between me stopping to try to make sure that everybody was okay and see who I could reach. And also once I got to the end of the New York Thruway where you would go as if you were going into Manhattan, that was closed about 60 miles outside of the city, because they only wanted emergency vehicles on that road so they could get them there in and out quickly. So I actually had to go around through Pennsylvania to get home. So it added about another 100 miles. I mean, you could see the smoke from how far out I was at the end of the Thruway.
Inspirational to watch what happened just by watching on television. Mm-hmm. it was extraordinary, the work that people did. But it's also quite amazing, like, that there were literally no injured. I mean, everyone was dead. What they had done was, with all the IDs that people had turned in, they must have kept them somewhere in a file cabinet. They survived 9/11. 6 months or so after 9/11, a police evidence bag shows up. No note, nothing at all, just an evidence bag. It's the New York City Police, and when I opened it, it was my old Brown and Wood ID card.
I think visitors and tourists, and I think people, maybe if they wanted to come in, were curious about how the cleanup was going, or if they had a loved one, and wanted to come in and be near them. That's probably the only people that even came close to Ground Zero. Everybody else that had to work in the city, I don't know that they wanted to come back, but they had to. They stayed north. You couldn't, even people that were residents, they couldn't even go back into their homes down there. One of my roommates from college, her brother, lived in an apartment about 10 blocks away. And he couldn't even move in for about a year and a half. Never went back, couldn't get his stuff, nothing. It was probably 3 or 4 months later before I actually went back into the city. We couldn't even get near downtown. There were just barricades everywhere. But I think the dirt and the soot and the amount of, it just didn't even look like the same place. Even buildings that weren't affected didn't look like the same place. I think the biggest thing that afternoon and evening going into the next morning was just that people didn't realize, we knew it was an act of terror, but nobody really knew.
All I did was watch the coverage on television. Time here on the deck, because ordinarily you hear and see a lot of airplanes. Everything was grounded, and that's a memory that's very distinct to my mind. Just sitting on the deck, and it was perfectly quiet. And it's interesting. The next day, I called Columbia and to arrange to get replacements. It was my effort to get back to normal. I did the same thing with photographs. I had a lot of photographs in the office, which were copies. And I remember I went through my album and I looked for all those pictures, and we went out, an effort to try to regain normalcy. And really, in looking for new permanent space, the only thing everyone really agreed on is that we wanted to be on a lower floor. And we didn't want to be in a marquee building. We wanted to be in a much more nondescript building. Sort of fighting the last war instead of the next one.
Yeah.
I don't think making buildings stronger against airplane attacks is, because I don't think that's what's going to happen the next time. So, I don't know. Most buildings don't have metal detectors. A few do, most don't.
Mm-hmm.
That even conceivable that you're going to stop terrorism is to in advance identify the troublemakers and the people who are plotting and planning and who they're working with, and stop them before they get a chance, because you can't have enough barricades and enough guards in front of every single target in the United States. And the only reason why I think attacks haven't occurred more and been more successful is because we've got 100,000 people under 24/7 surveillance.
Travel has changed dramatically since this attack. I remember in 1997, my husband and I went to a Green Bay Packer game for the weekend, and it was Monday morning, and we were running late because we stopped at an antique store, and my husband had to return the car rental yet, so he dropped me off at the airport, and I literally ran through the airport, got on the plane while he checked the rental car. There were no check-ins, there were no security issues. I had his ticket. He didn't even have his ticket. and they held the plane for him. They called his name and said, "We're holding the plane," and he just ran right on the plane, not even having a ticket. So that's definitely changed for the better. The feeling today, there's a cautiousness that having a terrorist attack on domestic soil, it's changed everything. And at that time, there was so much patriotism, flags hanging everywhere. And today, I honestly think the New York, the politicians, they did a good job. And there's cautious optimism today. And there's unity.
It didn't matter whether it was publicly owned, privately owned. There was no air travel for over a week. And my sister-in-law was actually on a business trip and had left the country and was in Canada, and she couldn't even get by car back over the border because they just shut everything down. So, I mean, you know, our core business, we couldn't even work for a week. Mm-hmm. But nobody cared. I mean, that's the thing. Nobody really cared. It was all about staying home with your family, taking care of your loved ones, and not really worrying. Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't fly for a few years after that. I've never liked to fly, so I don't think this one experience affected that directly. I do think it forever impacted how we handle air travel. Prior to that, it wasn't so hard to go on an airplane. You went through security, but it was nothing like today's version of security. You know, they didn't have you take your shoes off and check your bags and airport security like that. It was more where, you know, you'd walk through a machine that would see whether you were carrying metal. To be honest, other than like a gun or anything specific like that, they didn't really look for any of that. There was no situation with liquids. Nobody even thought about bombs or terrorists or any of that.
The smoke from the World Trade Center went up about a mile in the air. And it stayed that way for, I'll say, a month or two. Where you were, like coming in from New Jersey on the railroad, you'd look and there was this plume of smoke from downtown going into the sky.
We recently visited the 9/11 Memorial, and I found that to be very peaceful, and it was beautiful. They did a wonderful job with the reflecting pools, and I love the sense, the respect of everybody's name, and not being in alphabetical order, but being with who they worked with or who their friends were, and it gave you a sense of calm, and it was beautiful.
Forever it will be affected. I don't think it's something that people will ever forget. I think the impact of the children as the result of losing parents and friends and coworkers and police people and firemen. I mean, everybody knows of someone directly through, and you know, I hope that they never forget. I hope it never happens again. But I think this is long term. You know, our community in the short term, people walked around like in a big fog. Nobody really knew what to say or what to do. You know, what to share with your children, what not to share with your children based on how old they were. And I just think, you know, it forever formed the communities surrounding.